So it's spooky season. So when you say spooky season, it's time for horror stories, horror books. So I've decided to come with a list of 5 books that I recommend, anybody who on reading on during spooky time, essentially. I've made a list of 5 books actually, and from these 5 books, most of them are not really surprises. Some of them are quite classics and stories that if you've not read, you should definitely be reading. So they're not in any order really. It's just, as I said, it's just some recommendations. It's not a top 5 or anything. It's just some books that I really like and I feel like, everybody should read. As I said, once again, most of these books are quite familiar and they're not going to come as any surprises, but there are some hidden gems, in my opinion. Maybe books that don't get talk like they should, don't get the attention like they deserve. So on with the list. So firstly, the first book, so this is not going to be a surprise, but Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is really a really cool story. It's a gothic horror story, in part because you have this big haunted mansion. So the castle, not really a mansion, but castle of Dracula. So it's really cool how the story is developed. It's kind of a found footage kind of story, mainly because you're reading these small journal entries or letters that the main characters are exchanging. You also have like captain logs, doctor's logs also during the book. So it's really cool how the story is developing, through all these found notes, journal entries, logs, as I said, and so on. It's a clever book, one that I would recommend if you've never read. It's not really scary or anything. It's more the overall feeling of the book, the atmosphere throughout the story. So secondly, we have Michael McDowell's The Elemental. This is a gothic story, once again, but more on the quote-unquote classical gothic story, because you have actually 3 mansions that are haunted, but it's not your typical ghosts. It's hard to really explain what the ghosts are because it's never really explained in the stories. There are elementals, there are elements, there are beings that we don't know what they want actually, just that they're rather violent and that they caused death previously. So it's a very cool story. There's this one of the 3 mentioned that's slowly drowning in sand. If it's not crumbling, because it just looks like if the sand is going up, it's building around the mansion. I don't know how to really portray it exactly, but that's mainly it. And Mr. McDowell know how to write compelling, unlikable characters, and this in here, like, the family is really weird, and it's just really a really great story. It's a gothic story, once again, kind of scary at times, not that scary, but once again heavy on the atmosphere. It's really atmospheric. If you're feeling for a spooky setting, this is mainly it. It's really good. Then thirdly, we have H.P. Lovecraft's Color Out of Space. This is my favorite Lovecraft story. It's quite disturbing near the end. There's a really cool movie adaptation with Nicolas Cage in it, which is really great. But this is my favorite Lovecraft story, mainly because the alien thingy, it's not clear what it is, but it's just described as this color. So once again, really spooky, heavy on the atmosphere. It's a very enjoyable read. It's a short read. It's just a short story. I think it's like 20 pages or something. Then at number 4, we have Pet Sematary by Stephen King. It's not my favorite Stephen King story. My favorite would be Stephen King's It, actually, but it is a rather chunky book. So I would recommend, reading Pet Sematary. So it's a horror story that deals with grief, essentially, and how far would you go to remove that feeling of grief, that pain that comes from grief, actually. It's a very compelling story, and if you're like me, a father, it hits differently when you read it like at a young age, and reading it, afterwards when you have kids. It just hits a bit differently. It's a very good story. And so number 5, a book from Stephen King's son, Joe Hill, Heart-Shaped Box. This is a book that really scared me. Actually, there's this one scene where the guy's coming from out of his bedroom, like in the morning or something. I don't really remember the settings. I just remember that scene, when he comes out of his room and there's this old man rocking in a chair. It's just like, I still remember it today, and I have these shivers. Like, it's just, yeah, it's scary. That whole scene just scared me, actually. It's a very cool concept. The hunting of a thing, essentially, instead of people. It's really a compelling story. It's really well developed. Once again, kind of scary. There are some scary things happening within the book. The way it's written is really great, actually. I'd recommend you reading that. And just, I know I said like 5 books that I would recommend, but just one last, just adding a 6th book here. The Fog by James Herbert. It's a more gory book than all the others, but it's one hell of a ride. It's like 200 pages, but you can read that in a sitting or something, because it's just action-packed and a lot of gory stuff happening. It's very great book. It's my favorite James Herbert book from now. I've only read 3 books, but it's my favorite for now, and it's gruesome. It's on the verge of extreme horror, I'd say. Not fully there, but it's, it's really good. So that was my recommendations. If you have any, feel free to just comment down below. Feel free to leave a like on that video if you liked it, or subscribe. There's still space for you if you want to subscribe. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next week.